Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to another DM's Guild review, my written and video review series where I take a look at the adventures and supplemental material at the Dungeon Masters Guild website. With this video, I'll be reviewing the DM's Guild supplement Books and Libraries by Josef von Egmond, aka Juicy, aka RPGPapercrafts, for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. A review copy has been provided for the purposes of this review. If you enjoy my videos, consider using my affiliate links for your DM's Guild shopping and supporting me via patreon.com/roguewatson. Shout out to my platinum patrons, Andrew, Brian, Richard, and Joe, and gold patrons, RPG Papercrafts, Charming Grenade, Pretty Boy, and Yuma, Marcos, David, Vicente, Gilberto, Sean, aka Cert2B, Adam, Dead Lizard Lounge, and Auxi. Thank you all very much for your support. Now, before we begin, you may recognize the name RPG Papercrafts right there because they are one of my patrons of my YouTube channel, one of my first original patrons, and a longtime fan of our weekly live stream D&D show. Now, I reviewed one of Juicy's DM's Guild products before starting the Patreon during the earliest days of my DM's Guild reviews, and they approached me again recently to review one of their next products. So I would not have agreed to do this if I felt like I could not do an unbiased review. But I wanted to be obviously fully transparent to all of you that they are a patron of my channel and a fan of the show. So, and obviously I like them too. So, books and libraries. We're going to jump into it. This is something I really like when DM's Guild does this. A lot of the products I look for, and yeah, I've reviewed a lot of products where they're well done, but I just don't see a need for them necessarily. And maybe that, obviously I personally only need certain things, but I'm trying to, paint with a broad brush and say like, okay, who is the audience for this and what kind of thing. One of the problems recently, I did a review on a supplement about hags, which was well done, but I didn't really see the need for more information about hags because we had all that extra information about from I believe it was Valo's Guide to Monsters. It'd be like if we got even more about the UNT, even though we had a bunch of UNT information in Valo. So books and libraries I really like because it takes one thing that we don't have. It fills a good niche, which is let's talk about books in D&D. How can we make books more interesting? And as a DM, this is the kind of stuff that I really like looking for a supplement because, if my players were to go off the rails, so to speak, and explore a library or a shop, or in some way need a book, and I have to scramble to come up with something, and I'm not going to have that kind of information. I'm just going to bullshit my way through whatever, probably turn into a big joke, and that'll be it. What this does, it does the obvious first, which is it comes up with a few lore books, and a lot of them are very funny and tongue-in-cheek, which is good. But what it also does is provides a lot of really fun new kind of magical books that are spell books. They are mimics. They are traps. They are Eldritch horror volumes. They are dimensional gateways into their own little book realms. It does a lot of really fun things by turning books into not so much just like the Elder Scrolls thing about every book is kind of a whole story you can sit there and read. It doesn't so much do that as it does provide more books essentially as loot that you don't have to even stock in a library. You could just have a lot of these just be fun book-based loot, which would be fun obviously for a wizard or even any scholarly character. So I think it succeeds really well on there, and I'm very, very positive about this. We're going to go through them real quickly. It gives you some fun tables on designing books, as well as the actual, judging a book by a cover kind of a thing, and the content. So the content is really how this book guide supplement is divided up. And it divides them up between lore, which can come in fairy tales, compendium, or sheet music. And then it has skill guides, religious works, essentially a bunch of spell books, and then traps. I'm reading through them real quick. Planar novels, the codices, and then the Eldritch Volumes, and finally sentient books. And then the final parts of the supplement are libraries. So lore is, as you can imagine, just a simple title, and you give a description about what that book is. And this kind of gives a really fun chance for the author to make some really funny jokes about either pop culture references or references to semi-big D&D books, which I think is funny because a lot of people would maybe know about that without necessarily knowing about D&D. So, for example, a title could be The Mists of Barovia, which is about a vampire lord ruling Barovia. I think a lot of people, even if they're not clued into Forgotten Realms lore or Ravenloft in this case, kind of as a clue about what that is. Or Winter is Coming with the Ring of Winter, which kind of has a place in a lot of the D&D books like Storm King's Thunder and Tomb of Annihilation. Snakes and Ladders, about a story of a tomb in Chult. These are all very nice tongue-in-cheek. I especially like the Trolls story about the Troll Wars. Trolls 2, poor sequel of Trolls, and Trolls 3, Spare Yourself the Pain. The Elephant Man is a reference to a Loxodon, whatever that is, which is, of course, a good Ravnica nod. There's the Talking Dead, which is a wizard who makes nice zombies. These are all very nice. If you can make me laugh or at least crack a smile while reading your supplement, you're already well on your way to getting a thumbs up from me. Similar kind of nice tongue-in-cheek for the compendium, as well as sheet music, actually less tongue-in-cheek and just really good like poetry that's written through here that bards can perform. So those are basically just the lore stuff, which is just kind of funny, flavorful. If you just want to interject that in there, that's fine. And that's really what I expected mostly to get from here. What I didn't expect is a lot of really good mechanical stuff that you could give players almost as a reward. So for example, you can give them a skill guide. And the way this works is that once per long rest, you can spend an hour reading this skill guide, and every time you use that skill, you can apply the guide, and if you do that, I believe 5 times, then you get a permanent skill bonus. So it's a little fiddly in how it works, but I like that it is a very minor gift to somebody. As a loot, it's just a +1 bonus, and you have to have done that skill several times. But it's a nice kind of low-level piece of loot that could, be pretty like a permanent +1 is still a pretty big thing. And I think it's very flavorful to the actual how guides work. Is you need to, you can read the guide, but you need to actually apply the skill in practice. Doesn't necessarily make you magically better, although I could see it just doing that as well, just giving a +1. And the names are pretty funny too. A guide to stopping bleeding, medicine checks. I feel like certain grammatical presences should have been changed here. Stopping bleeding, probably better than stop bleeding. A guide to getting what you want, intimidation checks, body balancing, body building, brewing potions. Guide to magic tricks for sleight of hand, that kind of thing. Very, very good. Religious works kind of goes a little bit off what the whole guide's about, and it goes into a big philosophical debate and information. This is kind of more lore-based stuff, which I do like the artwork throughout. It's very nice. I also like the way, if you notice here, each different section actually has a different color, which is a really cool idea that I haven't really seen hardly any, if any, DM's Guild products use. Every single one of the different ones, and I was halfway through this book before I realized, like, oh wow, yeah, these are all like different color-coded, which is really cool to flip through. The Illuminated Manuscripts are the ones that actually add like a mechanical benefit. So essentially you can get a prayer book from one of your gods or goddesses from the Forgotten Realms, and then you can earn a boon as long as you spend an hour doing that prayer service. You get a certain bonus, whether that's a bonus against evil creatures or a bonus against good creatures, depending if you're Loth or Bahamut or Lathander. You gain a bonus to persuasion checks as long as you follow that deity's creed and pray, every hour. So that can be a fun thing to do for a very religious character. Could be a nice piece of loot, I guess. I probably wouldn't want to refer to their religious manuscript as loot. Trap books are exactly what you think they are. They come in either very obvious mimic forms, and we get 3 different kinds of CR flavors, a half, a CR1, and a CR2. Just books with teeth that reach out and grab you. They also come in some more insidious ways. The Spell Snare is essentially a trapped book that does some kind of spell-like effect when you open it, which I think is more interesting than the actual mimic. And then the Subliminal book, which is, it adds essentially a kind of long-term madness effect, and I feel like this is kind of missing a saving throw in, or no, it does say saving throw, sorry. The reader must succeed on a DC 14 wisdom saving throw to trigger the save, which I think both of those are more interesting than the actual just regular old mimics, but mimic is probably the correct choice to include in here as an obvious choice. I love the artwork though, with this just a book with teeth. Arcane publications, very, very obvious to add as loot, but even here I feel like the designer goes even above and beyond what I would consider an interesting spell book, and actually creates example spell books and differentiates between spell books and tomes. And a spell book is specifically a book of spells from a certain character. In this case, very powerful exotic creatures. Wish the Drowned Maiden, Gormoth the Sundering Demon, and they all have spells of a certain they all contain very certain spells. This reminded me of Pillars of Eternity did this, where you could equip a spell book on a wizard character, and it would literally have those certain spells in there. So it was kind of a way of having a wizard have these kind of equipable weapons, but they were just the spells, and they would just equip your entire loadout. Now, you could sit there and memorize your own spells and then create your own spell book, and that's what you ended up doing anyway, but it was a neat idea, and I feel like this is partly that idea, although a wizard can also just scribe all these spells, but it's cool that they come with multiple different spell levels. So for example, if they could only scribe up to level 4, they could keep the spell book, and every time they level up, they gain a new spell. And there are some custom spells in here. They're not all drawn from just the player's handbook, and there are some from Xanathar's. But there are some new custom spells that go along with the theme. So for example, the Drowned Maiden has some kind of lightning and dark spells. The Sundering Demon has a bunch of, obviously, demon spells. The Blue Dragon should have some more lightning spells, but have some more kind of containment spells. Track Treasure, very thematic to a dragon. Tomes, instead of being an individual spell books, they are an organization's spell book. And they have an added ability of an alteration, which is you can add as a bonus action, you can make an Arcana check whenever you cast a spell from this tome, and then add a certain alteration. And the examples are given, I think we're given 3 examples, a drow, a demon one, and a hag one. So I guess tomes are, it's a shame they're all very evil based. I think, does any good organization have a tome? But you can add in these extra effects, so... the most interesting was the Mammon, the demon one. He's the god of the archdevil of greed, and you can add as an alteration, force the victim to make a DC Charisma saving throw on a 1 or a failed save. The target becomes obsessed with an object of the caster's choice. That is a lot of fun role-playing possibilities. And then we get a bunch of custom spells with those as well. So these are really, really neat ideas. I like this concept of awarding people spell books that have their own custom spells, and then the alteration concept is a neat thing to throw on top of that to make this more than just a spell book. It is a tome that when you casting these specific spells and you can make a skill check, you can do this other benefit. It adds some really cool advanced features for a wizard, which normally wizards don't get a whole lot of cool loot other than the obvious kind of, magical staff or something. Manual is pretty much the same as the player handbook, just kind of mentions them here. Magical scrolls, again, those are plenty. You can take any spell and turn it into a scroll, but here we get some custom scrolls, which I think are all a little more similar to Xanathar's in that they added some low-level ones that maybe don't have much power to them, but can be very interesting and fun flavor-wise. Like a scroll of snails appears and just eats everything after 10 minutes. Or whispers can tell you what happened in the past 24 hours in this area. Like, very kind of odd, weird shit, but can make for fun, interesting loot without breaking the balance of a low-level game. Sheet music is another really neat idea. I don't want to go on a rant about bards, but I think D&D has one of the worst implementations of the bard class compared to any other RPG I've played. And by RPG, I'm meaning video games in this case. I think a lot of video games do bards way better than D&D does. D&D still just treats bard as this weird bastard child of a rogue and a wizard. And what I like to see is RPGs that use bards and their bard song as like unique magical effects that are ongoing. And again, to cite Pillars of Eternity had a really cool chanter class that had a really neat, flavorful bard stuff where you could sing songs and put the notes together, and then that would have a certain effects. It was really cool and felt really different rather than just you're basically just a weird rogue wizard. And I feel like this kind of is like that. The magical sheet music is a good way of getting that flavor. Once per day you can basically sing this song that has these, obviously these magic effects, but it still feels very thematic and tied to a bard and something like only the bard could do. I like that a lot, and that's a cool example of just giving them, instead of like reinventing the bard class for D&D, just give them magical sheet music and that only they can use and kind of has similar magical effects. That's really, really cool. Codices are this one is a little more confusing, but they offer let's see, the hunter is pretty cool. You can you're reading the book, and while you're reading it, it's like a horror story, and this monster attacks, and then this monster really does attack, which I think is kind of a neat trap type thing. But they can reveal secret doorways or new areas and kind of lead to their own little mini quests, like in the Moon Crystal or the Ring of Power. So some really neat kind of high concept ideas there. Eldritch Volumes is a way to add the kind of Cthulhu horror aspect of D&D. And this one is really cleverly done because it gives you several examples, and then each one is a different volume that you read, and they're not given the prose, we're just given kind of the description, which, again, and a lot of this happens with Eldritch horrors. You just kind of describe the fact that, oh, the words are like, wriggling on the page, and you feel your mind going nuts and all that. That's very thematic to Eldritch horror. And in this case, each one, and it says the read and effect for every single one of these volumes, you get increasingly worse kinds of madness, but then you can also gain new abilities and benefits. Usually they're pretty horrible, though. They require like chopping off a limb or sacrificing a loved one or doing some kind of awful, awful thing. And there is a note that's like, hey, DMs, be aware this is bad stuff to introduce to your party, and could sow like some really, really bad relationships between players. And obviously they can be very good for villains or kind of a thing on a villain that maybe would tempt them. So be careful about using this kind of thing. Planar novels are a cool idea I've seen in some RPGs where, books or paintings or something is literally a gateway to another world. I know that the Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion did a really good quest with this where there was some kind of magical painting and you literally like jumped inside of it at one point and had to fight like a troll or something. I don't remember if Skyrim did something like that, but I remember that one specifically from Oblivion. This is a very similar idea where you can jump inside like a book as a gateway to another world. In this case, it's like a history book, and you jump in. There's two examples that are being given. They're both very different, and they do an excellent job of showcasing how to use this system. And the first one is you're basically retelling this war, this siege on this town, and you can the players can do different things, including combat, and the end result is when you get back to the present, you can then have different effects on, reaching that city and then being able to talk about those people or meet somebody that might have been a child in the history book and now they're an old lady or something. Which is very cool. It's a good way of showing off like here's what happened to this place without using a cutscene instead, without doing like a magical ghostly apparition thing, which I've done quite a few times. This is a neat idea where players can literally jump into the past and kind of relive it. The other one is a really funny test that's almost like an adventure game design that I wish was like an entire DM's Guild adventure on its own, because I loved the idea behind this. But every single chapter is designed to help you figure out how to be a better mage, and they give you a selection of spells and then told to accomplish a challenge. One of them is offense, one of them is defense, one of them is just survival. And a really good example of how funny this is, the first one, there's 3 different dummies all made of different kind of elemental types. There's straw and flesh and water. And you're given a bunch of different spells of different kinds, but the winning choice is to use Firebolt on all 3 of them, even the water one, because it says, well done. Remember, if you're ever in doubt, cast Firebolt. I think it's really funny because that's kind of like the Warlock always casting Eldritch Blast. Like, that's what wizards do. They just cast Firebolt on everything. So that was a funny joke. But I really like that idea, and I want to incorporate that in some ways, having this adventure game style thing where players all jump in together, all have the same materials, and they have to figure out how to do something, and they're literally awarded a score at the end. That's pretty funny. Sentient books, kind of similar to Mimic books. We get stat blocks. They're just more powerful. We do get cool stories behind them, which is neat. It's less interesting to me than giving somebody good loot, though. And the books themselves don't seem to have a lot of too much more personality versus the actual background of how this book was created. But they can communicate with their owners, and they have their own spell blocks, so that's interesting. Libraries is the weakest link of this supplement. Just because based on how long, there's 33 pages of detailed notes on all these different books, and then libraries is like kind of an afterthought almost. We get that same kind of we get the, what do you call them, the D10, D12 tables of different library styles that we kind of got on books in the beginning, and then you're basically just given examples. Like there's some exotic library examples. Here, like there's a library in hell, essentially. There's a library, it could be a library in a book cave, a library in a storm giant observatory. Those are kind of neat examples. And then you're just given famous libraries of Faerun, as well as some famous books of Faerun, which some of these are in the Dungeon Master's Guide. And that's pretty much it. Like that's all you get on library. I was expecting more of like maybe here's how to build out a library, or what I would have really loved to see is here's a specific example library. And here are the books that you just read about. So all these books, here's why they would be in this area, or maybe a couple different libraries. Like, okay, well, in this library is a, just the secret back alley of a bookstore in a town. So you might see like kind of these books, and then this kind of bookstore would be in an ancient, or well, not bookstore, but you might find this book in the desk in an ancient ruin somewhere, and it would be this book. Examples of where you would find this kind of loot. But libraries, I was expecting maybe like a map template, and here's how a library could be. And maybe if you pull this book off the shelf, it opens this secret door, and maybe there's another library in a glass thing. I'm just spitballing here, but I was really expecting more extensive details on the libraries, just because we got all those extensive details on the books themselves. So it's a bummer that the library was almost an afterthought at the end here. I would have liked to see that fleshed out a lot more. Kind of a neat little thing of sample scripts here. Let's go over my pros and cons for books and libraries. So pros: extensive details on magical and mundane books to fill out D&D libraries and scholarly loot. Pro: large variety of book types including mimics, spellbooks, skill guides, traps, and dimensional gateways. Wow, I was really impressed. This is not just like good lore books. There's actual books that would be fun as loot, which I didn't think books, aside from obvious spell books, would be that fun as loot. Pro: codices, planar novels, and Eldritch Volumes expertly combine interesting role-playing moments and areas with thematic benefits and detriments. I like the way that books are used both as interesting role-playing tools and also in-game mechanical benefits. I have a party that's very kind of action RPG oriented, where they're interested in leveling up and getting more powerful and getting loot. Yes, we're all telling a story together and having fun in D&D, but it's less like dramatic story moments and more about smashing down doors and getting loot. That's just kind of the theme that we go after. And so if I can have loot that is in some way mechanically beneficial to players, that makes it much more interesting, rather than just, okay, this is a book with the stories in it. Like, okay, this is a book with stories in it that also gives you a +1 to something. Like that kind of loot is more meaningful to me, and that's what this does very well. And then things like the planar novels and Eldritch Volumes add a lot of RPG role-playing and exploration elements to it, which is fun. Cons: the library section is comparatively weak, mostly listing famous libraries of the Forgotten Realms. I was really expecting a lot more from the libraries. Final verdict: books and libraries not only provides a fantastic resource to fill out a library or shop, but also introduces several fascinating new book-based magical features and ideas to make books exciting rewards as well as dangerous threats. Thank you to everyone for watching this video review. You can see my written review at roguewatson.com. You can support my work at patreon.com/roguewatson. And you can follow our own D&D adventures here on my YouTube channel. Thank you.